They said success had a sound crystal glasses clinking, laughter rolling beneath chandeliers, the whisper of silk against marble floors. Inside the Waldorf Astoria that night, it was deafening. The ballroom gleamed like a crown, its golden walls catching the light of 1,000 bulbs, its air heavy with money, perfume, and ambition. Every guest who stepped through the tall doors believed they were standing inside the very heart of modern victory. Heliosite Technologies had just gone public in one of the most successful IPOs of the decade. Cameras flashed, reporters hovered near the stage, investors toasted to numbers that shimmered like gold in the air. And at the center of it all stood Jonathan Rains, 32, the kind of man who made people stop talking when he walked past. His tuxedo fit like second skin, his hair slicked back, his smile deliberate. But the closer you looked, the easier it was to see that the confidence on his face was practiced, not born. There were faint lines near his mouth, a quiet tightness around his eyes, a fatigue that didn't belong to someone celebrating a victory. He had spent years building Heliosite from a dorm room code into a billion-dollar empire. Yet as the orchestra played a soft waltz, he felt nothing but distance from his company, from his people, from himself. Across the ballroom, a young waitress balanced a tray of champagne flutes with practiced grace. Her name was Aurora Lane. She moved quietly, almost invisible among the sea of gowns and tuxedos. Her blonde hair was tied in a neat ponytail. Her eyes, however, refused to rest. They flicked from table to table, tracing faces, lips, whispers. Beneath her calm exterior, a storm churned. She wasn't supposed to be here tonight. She had traded shifts with another girl just to earn enough for rent. Her 6-year-old sister, Maya, waited for her in the staff lounge, dressed in her favorite pink dress, swinging her legs and humming to herself. Aurora had promised she'd be done by 10. She had meant it until she walked past the corridor behind the VIP lounge and heard something that turned her blood to ice. 2 men were speaking in low, deliberate tones. Their voices carried the confidence of those who never had to whisper. "He's got the files," one said. "The champagne's already been set aside. Once he drinks, we move." The other chuckled dry, careless. "He shouldn't have gone digging where he didn't belong." A third voice joined in, older, heavy with authority. "Make sure it's clean. No scandal. He'll be remembered fondly." Aurora's hand froze on the doorframe. She didn't understand everything, but she heard enough. He meant Jonathan Rains. Move meant act, and clean meant permanent. She backed away, her pulse roaring in her ears. For a few seconds she stood motionless, staring at the tray of glasses in her hands. Then something inside her, something small but fierce, made a decision before fear could argue. When she returned to the ballroom, the orchestra had changed its tune. Jonathan was stepping toward the podium, champagne flute in hand, preparing for the celebratory toast that would be broadcast live across financial news networks. Aurora threaded through the crowd, careful not to run, careful not to draw attention. The smell of champagne hit her, sharp and sweet. Her fingers trembled. The clock on the far wall ticked toward 10. She saw Jonathan raise his glass. The world seemed to narrow until there was only him, the flute, and her. She took one step forward, then another, and at the last second pretended to stumble. The tray tilted, the contents clattered. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she gasped, lowering herself beside him, her hands reaching for a napkin. The spill had caught his sleeve. He turned, startled but polite, giving her the faintest smile of reassurance. And that was when she did it. With one quick motion, she dabbed his arm with one hand and slipped a folded piece of paper into his palm with the other. "Please forgive me, sir," she murmured, eyes down, voice almost trembling. Then she backed away before he could respond. Jonathan stared after her, puzzled, the paper hidden in his hand. He unfolded it behind his back, careful not to draw eyes. The handwriting was hurried, the words uneven. "Do not drink. Leave now. They know you found out." His breath caught. For a fraction of a second he didn't move, didn't blink. Then the sound of laughter around him returned, too loud, too false. The music carried on. The lights glittered, but the room no longer looked the same. The people he had called colleagues and friends now looked like a circle of masks. Every glance felt sharper, every smile too tight. He realized, with chilling clarity, that the woman who had just spilled his drink might have saved his life. He didn't turn toward her immediately. He folded the note, slipped it into his inner pocket, and placed his untouched champagne flute on a nearby tray. Then, with the poise of a man in full control, he stepped down from the podium and moved through the guests, exchanging nods and smiles that meant nothing. When he reached the edge of the ballroom, he saw her again, the waitress with the ponytail, slipping through the side doors toward the service corridor. Without a word, he followed. His reflection glided beside hers in the mirrored wall, two silhouettes moving toward the unknown. Aurora felt the shift in the air before she heard his voice. "Don't turn around," Jonathan said quietly, close enough for his breath to brush her shoulder. She froze, her fingers tightening around the tray. "I read your note," he continued. "We need to leave. Now." She hesitated, her mind spinning, but when she looked into the reflection beside her, his eyes were steady calm, not frightened. The calm of someone who had faced storms before. "Come with me," he said, and his tone wasn't a request. They slipped through the side door into the service hallway. The golden music of the ballroom faded behind them, replaced by the hum of distant boilers and the echo of hurried footsteps. Aurora's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Jonathan moved ahead, decisive, confident, even as danger thickened around them. "What's your name?" he asked without looking back. "Aurora," she whispered. "Aurora Lane." He nodded. "Stay close, Miss Lane." The hallway smelled of metal and detergent. The world of chandeliers and applause was now a world of concrete and shadows. Aurora realized, for the first time, that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Jonathan paused at the end of the corridor, scanning for cameras, guards, anything unusual. Then he opened the door leading to the service elevator. "We'll talk downstairs," he said. His voice carried no panic, only control. When the elevator doors closed behind them, Aurora exhaled for the first time in minutes. The silence inside was heavy, almost sacred. She stared at her reflection in the metal wall, her face pale, her eyes wide. Jonathan turned to her, the paper now folded again in his hand. "Who told you?" he asked. She shook her head. "No one. I just heard them. Behind the VIP lounge. They said your name. They said once you drink." Her voice broke. "I didn't know what else to do." Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. The elevator light flickered across his face, half gold, half shadow. "You did the right thing," he said finally. His tone was quiet, but it carried a weight that made her chest tighten. For the first time that night, she saw something human in his eyes, gratitude, not power. As the elevator descended, the ballroom music faded completely. Only their breathing remained. When the doors slid open to the dim basement corridor, Jonathan stepped out first, scanning the empty space before turning back to her. "From now on," he said, "you don't leave my sight." She nodded without thinking. Somewhere above them, laughter continued, a world of illusions spinning on without them. Down here, the truth had already begun to breathe. And as they walked deeper into the narrow hall, Aurora felt the weight of the note still pressing against his pocket, 4 hurried words that had already changed the course of both their lives. The elevator door closed with a metallic sigh, sealing them inside a box of humming machinery and dim yellow light. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick, filled with the echo of everything that had just happened. Aurora stared at the floor, her fingers trembling around the edge of her tray. She hadn't even realized she was still holding it until Jonathan reached over and gently took it from her. "You can let go now," he said softly. His voice was calm, the kind that made people listen without realizing it. She looked up at him, at the man everyone in the ballroom had admired like a statue carved from glass, and saw that his composure was no mask now. It was focus, survival. The elevator jolted slightly as it began to move. The fluorescent light flickered above them, turning his face into alternating bands of gold and shadow. "Tell me exactly what you heard," he said. Aurora swallowed. 3 men, behind the VIP lounge. One of them said, "He's got the files." Another said, "Once he drinks, we move." The last one called you by name. She hesitated. He said, "He shouldn't have gone digging where he didn't belong." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "What did they look like?" 2 I didn't know," she said quietly. "But the third, he was older, gray hair, glasses. I've seen him before." He was in one of your photographs near the entrance. The vice chairman, maybe? Jonathan's eyes darkened. Coburn. The name left his mouth like an exhale of disbelief, not surprise. The elevator stopped. A small chime echoed, and the doors slid open to reveal a concrete corridor lined with crates and folded tablecloths. The air was colder here, untouched by the perfume and laughter above. Jonathan stepped out first, scanning both directions. His movements were economical, precise, like someone who'd learned long ago that hesitation cost more than mistakes. "Follow me," he said. Aurora obeyed. Her heels clicked softly on the floor, each sound too loud against the emptiness. "We're safe down here for now," he said, pushing open a metal door that led to a narrow storage room. The smell of cleaning agents and damp concrete hit them as they entered. He flicked on a single bulb that cast a pale cone of light over stacks of linen. "Talk," he said simply, leaning against a shelf. Aurora told him everything. The overheard voices, the trembling moment before she slipped the note, the way the room had seemed to close in after. While she spoke, Jonathan didn't interrupt. He listened, one hand pressed against his chin, his gaze steady and analytical. When she finished, the silence that followed felt heavier than her words. "Finally," he said, "they know I found the files." "Files?" she asked. "About what?" He hesitated, then took a slow breath. "About 6 months ago, I noticed inconsistencies in one of our charitable branches, a foundation meant to fund medical outreach. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Fake vendors, false invoices, inflated expenses, millions disappearing into private accounts." Aurora blinked. "And Coburn?" "He signed off on every report." Jonathan rubbed his temple. "I didn't have proof yet. I was preparing to confront the board next week, but I must have left a trail. Someone tipped them off." The words hung in the air like dust. Aurora wrapped her arms around herself, her apron still damp from the spilled champagne. "So they wanted you gone before you could speak." He nodded slowly. "They would rather bury me than face the truth." The way he said it wasn't angry. It was weary, almost sad. He reached into his pocket, unfolded her note again, and stared at it for a long moment. "You might have saved my life tonight," he said quietly. "No one else would have dared." She shook her head. "I just couldn't watch it happen." "Most people wouldn't have seen it at all," he replied. The bulb above them buzzed faintly. Somewhere in the pipes, a rush of water echoed. Aurora's nerves began to settle, though her body still trembled from adrenaline. "What now?" she asked. Jonathan straightened, his expression sharpening again. "Now we make sure you're safe. They won't take chances once they realize I didn't drink." "I can handle myself," she tried to say, but her voice betrayed her. He gave her a small, knowing look. "You shouldn't have to." Then, as if remembering something, Aurora gasped. "My sister. She's still upstairs in the staff lounge. I told her I'd be done by 10. Jonathan froze. "She's here? In the building?" "Yes. She waits for me during my shifts. I couldn't leave her alone at home." For the first time, a trace of genuine alarm crossed his face. "We have to get her now. If anyone saw you near me, they might connect things." He turned off the light, leaving them in partial darkness. The corridor outside was silent, except for the distant thud of music through the walls. They moved quickly, passing stacked chairs and metal racks. Aurora's breathing came in shallow bursts. Jonathan kept a steady pace ahead, his steps sure even in the dim glow of emergency lights. "When we reach the back exit, there's an alley that leads to the service road," he said. "My car is parked 3 blocks away. We'll be faster on foot." She nodded, though her chest ached with worry. As they neared the stairwell, a faint noise stopped them. Voices, 2 men talking near the junction, their tone clipped and suspicious. Jonathan motioned for silence. They waited in the shadows, listening. "Said the toast should have happened by now," one man muttered. "If he's not drunk, we've got a problem," the other replied. "Coburn's furious." He said, "Check the service floors." The footsteps began moving their way. Jonathan's eyes flicked to Aurora, then to a side door labeled boiler access. Without hesitation, he grabbed her hand and pulled her inside. The room was small, hot, and loud with the hum of machinery. They pressed themselves behind a water tank as the voices grew closer outside. Aurora's pulse hammered in her throat. Jonathan leaned close, his breath steady near her ear. "Don't move," he whispered. She nodded, barely daring to breathe. Seconds stretched like hours. The footsteps passed, fading down another hall. When the silence returned, Aurora realized her hand was still in his. He released it gently, his face unreadable. "Come on," he said, opening the door. They slipped out and continued through the maze of corridors until they reached the stairwell door. Jonathan pushed it open. A gust of cool air hit them, the kind of air that tasted like freedom. "Go," he said. She went first, gripping the rail, her shoes clattering softly on the metal steps. He followed close behind, glancing upward every few seconds. When they reached the lower landing, he held out an arm, stopping her. "Wait." She froze. Through the narrow window at the end of the hallway, a sliver of the outside world appeared: night air, rain beginning to fall, and the faint glow of the city beyond. "That door leads to the back alley," he said. "Is she waiting near there?" "Yes," Aurora whispered. "A bench, just past the dumpsters. Then we move fast." He opened the door and the cold night spilled in, carrying the scent of rain and gasoline. The alley stretched long and empty, slick with puddles reflecting neon light. At the far end, a small figure sat swinging her legs, her pink dress bright even in the gloom. "Maya," Aurora breathed. She ran forward, her shoes splashing through water. The little girl looked up and smiled, her face lighting the darkness. "You're late," she said, half a laugh, half a complaint. Aurora knelt and wrapped her arms around her. "I know, baby. I'm sorry." Jonathan approached quietly behind them, his tuxedo damp from the drizzle. He crouched down, removed his jacket, and placed it over Maya's shoulders. "It's cold tonight," he said gently. The girl blinked up at him, curious. "Are you Mommy's boss?" He smiled faintly. "Something like that." Aurora met his gaze over her sister's head, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. He looked away first. "We can't stay here," he said. "Do you trust me?" She hesitated, then nodded. He took out his phone, the screen glowing against the rain. "Mark," he said into the receiver. "Back alley entrance, Waldorf. Bring the car. No questions." A pause. "Yes now." He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. The rain began to fall harder, pattering on metal and concrete. Aurora held Maya close, feeling the child's small heartbeat against her chest. Jonathan stood beside them, scanning the alley, his posture alert but unafraid. For the first time since the ballroom, Aurora allowed herself to breathe without trembling. Within minutes, the distant sound of an engine grew louder, a black SUV turning the corner. Headlights dimmed. It stopped beside them. A man stepped out, tall, rugged, eyes sharp under the brim of a baseball cap. "You picked a hell of a night for a rescue," he muttered. "Aurora, this is Mark Dalton," Jonathan said. "Friend, former NYPD, the only person I trust right now." Mark nodded once, opening the back door. "Get in, fast." Aurora helped Maya inside, then slid in after her. Jonathan climbed in last, shutting the door behind them. As the car pulled away, the hotel's glittering facade faded into the distance, swallowed by rain and fog. Inside the vehicle, it was quiet except for the rhythm of windshield wipers. Maya leaned against her sister, already half asleep, wrapped in a billionaire's jacket that smelled faintly of rain and cologne. Aurora stared out the window, her reflection overlapping the city lights. Jonathan sat opposite her, his expression unreadable but softened by exhaustion. "You don't have to thank me," she whispered suddenly, not sure why. He looked at her. "I wasn't going to," he said, then smiled just enough for her to see it wasn't arrogance, it was reassurance. "But I will say this. What you did tonight took courage. Most people spend their lives wishing they'd done the right thing. You just did." She looked down, cheeks burning, unsure how to respond. The hum of the tires filled the silence. The SUV turned onto a quieter street, the rain easing into mist. Jonathan leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. Aurora glanced at him, at the man who had everything to lose and yet still managed to sound calm in the face of betrayal. She wondered how someone like him carried so much control in a world that had just tried to kill him. Outside, the city kept moving: cars, lights, strangers oblivious to the small miracle unfolding in the dark. And as they drove deeper into the night, Aurora realized that what had begun as an act of instinct had already become something larger, the fragile beginning of trust between two people who had every reason to fear. The black SUV moved through the wet Manhattan streets like a silent animal, headlights cutting thin lines of gold through the rain. Inside, the air was still and heavy, thick with the scent of damp fabric and adrenaline. Aurora sat pressed against the window, her sister Maya asleep on her lap, the child's small fingers tangled in the edge of Jonathan's jacket. Across from her, Jonathan watched the city pass in silence, his reflection fractured by every passing streetlight. Mark Dalton drove with both hands firm on the wheel, eyes flicking between the mirrors and the road. No one spoke for several blocks. When he finally did, his voice was gravel low. "You planning to tell me what the hell happened?" Jonathan's gaze stayed on the window. "Later. For now, just keep driving east. I need a place we can breathe." Mark exhaled, muttering something under his breath, but obeyed. Aurora listened to the sound of the tires against wet asphalt. Every mile they put between themselves and the hotel felt like another heartbeat she didn't know she had left. They turned down a narrow street between two old buildings and stopped in front of a brownstone with cracked stone steps and ivy curling along its windows. The kind of place no one would associate with a billionaire. Jonathan opened the door first, stepping out into the drizzle. "We're here," he said. Aurora followed, clutching Maya against her shoulder. The air smelled of wet earth and rain, soaked leaves. Mark killed the engine, glancing at Jonathan. "You sure about this?" "No one knows this address," Jonathan replied. "It's not under my name." He led them up the stairs, keys already in hand. The door creaked open into a warm but modest apartment, wood floors, shelves of books, a worn leather couch, and faint light from a single lamp. Aurora blinked, surprised. "This doesn't look like where a CEO lives," she murmured. Jonathan half smiled. "That's because it isn't. It's where I try to remember who I am." He motioned toward the small hallway. "Guest room's down there. Let her sleep." Aurora nodded and carried Maya through the door. When she returned, Jonathan had removed his tie and was unbuttoning his cuffs. The tension of the ballroom had begun to peel away, but the exhaustion beneath it remained. He walked to a cabinet by the desk, reached behind a row of books, and pressed a small latch. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a steel safe. He entered a code, opened it, and pulled out a folder, a flash drive, and a leather notebook. Spreading them on the desk, he said, "These are what they wanted buried." Aurora stepped closer, curiosity pushing past her fear. The papers were filled with financial records, signatures, and numbers circled in red ink. "What is this?" she asked. "Internal audits," he said. "Charity branches that exist on paper but not in reality. Money meant for medical aid redirected to dummy corporations. It's been happening for years." Aurora ran her eyes down the column of figures. She wasn't an accountant, but even she could feel the wrongness of it. "You were going to expose them?" "I was going to confront the board," he corrected. "I believed we could fix it quietly. I was wrong." He turned the flash drive in his hand, its metallic surface catching the lamplight. "That drive holds every transaction, every email trail, enough to send people to prison, but it also paints a target on my back." Aurora met his eyes. "Then why didn't you destroy it?" "Because truth isn't a weapon to hide," he said simply. "It's the only thing that keeps us from becoming like them." For a moment, silence filled the room again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was fragile, like the pause between two people learning to trust. Aurora sank into the chair across from him, the weight of the night finally settling over her. "I don't even know how I fit into all this," she said softly. "I'm just a waitress who got lucky overhearing something." Jonathan shook his head. "Luck doesn't write notes under pressure. You saw something wrong and acted. That's more than most people with power would do." His words hung in the air, quiet but firm, and she didn't know what to do with them. Mark returned from locking the door and leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You've got two problems," he said. "One, whoever tried to poison you doesn't know you're alive yet, but they will soon. Two, this girl and her kid can't exactly disappear without someone asking questions." Jonathan nodded. "We'll handle both. For now, we rest." He turned to Aurora. There's food in the kitchen. You should eat. She shook her head. I couldn't. You should, he insisted gently. You'll need strength. Something in his tone made her rise and do as told. In the kitchen, she poured a glass of water, her hands still shaking. The night replayed behind her eyes in flashes, the laughter, the chandeliers, the moment her note left her fingers. She leaned against the counter, trying to breathe through the tremor in her chest. When she returned to the living room, Jonathan was sitting on the couch, his head tilted back, eyes closed. For the first time, he looked human, tired, unguarded. She sat quietly across from him, afraid to break whatever fragile peace had settled. The clock ticked softly. Mark had dozed off in the armchair, one hand resting near the concealed holster on his hip. Aurora studied the room. There were photographs on the shelf: Jonathan as a teenager, a graduation portrait, a group of engineers laughing in an early startup office. It was strange to see a man the world called ruthless, surrounded by evidence of simpler years. Then, without opening his eyes, Jonathan spoke. You can sleep in the guest room if you want. I'll stay up a while. She hesitated. You're not going to? Not yet. My mind's too loud. She smiled faintly. Mine too. He opened his eyes and met hers. The dim light softened everything: his features, his voice, the distance between them. You did something tonight that most people only dream of doing, he said. You chose what was right instead of what was safe. Don't let the fear make you regret it. Aurora looked away, unsure whether to thank him or argue. I didn't think. I just moved. Sometimes that's how courage works, he said. A faint sound interrupted them, the creak of a door down the hall. Maya appeared, rubbing her eyes, the oversized jacket dragging behind her. I had a bad dream, she mumbled. Aurora knelt, pulling her close. Jonathan stood, unsure whether to help or give them space. It's okay, sweetheart, Aurora whispered, brushing the child's hair back. You're safe. Maya looked up at Jonathan. You look tired, she said innocently. He laughed softly. I am. She tilted her head. You need sleep too. Yes, ma'am, he replied, smiling despite himself. The moment felt oddly grounding, as if this tiny stranger had reminded them both what mattered. After Maya went back to bed, Aurora lingered near the doorway, watching the city lights blink through the rain-specked window. Jonathan joined her, standing at a respectful distance. Tomorrow, he said quietly, I'll contact someone I trust at the legal office. We'll need to move carefully. And if they find us, she asked, then we'll be ready. His confidence wasn't arrogance, it was resolve. Aurora nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know why you trust me. Because you had nothing to gain, he said. That's the rarest kind of ally. Outside, thunder rolled over the skyline, a low growl fading into silence. For a moment, the world felt suspended, three souls hiding between what had been and what was coming. Aurora glanced at Jonathan's reflection in the window, and for the first time since the chaos began, she felt something unfamiliar. Safety. Not because the danger was gone, but because she wasn't alone in facing it. Later, when she finally lay down beside Maya, the child curled close, breathing steady. Through the thin wall, she could hear Jonathan's quiet voice on the phone, giving instructions, calm and deliberate. She couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm, a steady heartbeat in a world gone unpredictable. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep and dreamless, the first peace she'd known in years. In the next room, Jonathan sat at the desk under the lamplight, the same folder open before him. He stared at the columns of numbers, at the evidence that had nearly cost him his life, and thought of the woman sleeping down the hall, the waitress who had seen through the glitter to the truth beneath. The rain outside eased into a whisper. He closed the folder and leaned back, exhaustion finally catching up. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about the company, the scandal, or the headlines. He was thinking about a folded note, written in a rush, that had reminded him what integrity looked like. When he finally turned off the lamp, the apartment fell into darkness except for the faint glow of the city beyond the glass. Outside, the rain washed the streets clean. Inside, 3 lives had found fragile shelter in the storm. Morning came reluctantly, gray and heavy with the kind of fog that softened the edges of buildings and made the city look half asleep. In the small apartment, the quiet was fragile. Aurora woke first, her body aching from the unfamiliar bed, her mind still balancing between disbelief and dread. The memory of the night before returned slowly: the ballroom, the note, the escape, Jonathan's voice saying she had saved his life. For a few seconds, she stayed still, listening. Maya was still asleep beside her, breathing softly. From the other room came the faint clink of glass and the low murmur of a man's voice. She followed it to find Jonathan standing near the window, speaking into his phone, his tone calm but sharp. "We moved today," he said. "Get me the contact at the bureau. Quiet channel. I don't want this going through corporate." He ended the call, turning just as Aurora appeared in the doorway. "You didn't sleep much," she said quietly. "Neither did you," he replied, glancing toward Maya's room. "She okay?" "She's fine. She dreams light." Mark came in from the hallway carrying a newspaper still wrapped in plastic. "They've noticed," he said, tossing it onto the table. The headline read, "CEO Rains Missing After IPO Gala." A smaller subheading added, "Board to Announce Interim Leadership." Jonathan stared at it for a long second. "They're moving faster than I thought." "They'll hold an emergency meeting," Mark said. "Probably today. Decide who takes your seat before you can sit back in it." Aurora's stomach tightened. "You're going back there?" Jonathan looked at her. "Not yet. First, we listen." He walked toward the cabinet, retrieved the folder and flash drive, and handed them to Mark. "Can you get this copied and encoded?" "Already on it," Mark said. "I'll set up a surveillance link too. If they meet, we'll know." By noon, the apartment had turned into a command post. Mark's laptop glowed on the coffee table, wires snaking toward a small transmitter. Aurora watched as he calibrated the feed. "How does it work?" she asked. "Simple," he said without looking up. "You plant this near their meeting room. It picks up sound within 15 feet. Send the signal back here. We record everything." "And you want me to plant it?" she asked, realizing what he meant, even before he nodded. "They know your face now," Mark said. "They'll be watching him, not you. The staff turnover's high at the hotel. If you go in through the service list, they'll think you're new." Jonathan met her gaze. "You don't have to do this." She hesitated, heart racing, then said, "Yes, I do. If I don't help, all of this what happened last night won't matter." There was no heroism in her voice, only quiet resolve. Jonathan studied her for a moment longer before nodding. "Then we do it carefully." Mark handed her the transmitter, small, black, thin as a matchbox. "Hide it under your tray. The mic is pressure sensitive. Once you place the tray on the table, it activates. Don't draw attention. Don't stay longer than you need." She nodded. "And if someone stops me?" Mark smiled faintly. "Smile back and walk away." By late afternoon, the plan was set. Aurora changed into the crisp uniform. Mark had brought white shirt, black vest, hair tied neatly under a cap. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize the reflection staring back. Fear hid behind discipline, nerves masked by purpose. Jonathan stood by the door, his expression unreadable. "Remember," he said softly, "you're not alone in there. We'll be listening." Aurora met his eyes. "Then let's finish what we started." The hotel looked different in daylight. The glamour had faded into something colder, sterile. The lobby smelled faintly of bleach and expensive flowers. Aurora moved through the service entrance, head down, blending into the quiet rhythm of staff preparing for another event. No one questioned her. Her badge, freshly printed by Mark, looked authentic enough. She carried a silver tray of coffee and water bottles toward the executive conference room on the top floor. Every step echoed in her chest like a countdown. When she reached the door, she heard voices inside, low, authoritative, the kind that filled rooms without needing to shout. "Mr. Rains's absence leaves us no choice," one of them said. "We need stability." Another replied, "Stability? We need control. If the leaks continue, the entire foundation collapses." A third voice, Coburn's, cut through the room, smooth and venomous. He overreached. The moment he questioned the accounts, he signed his own resignation. Laughter followed. Aurora steadied her hand, pushed the door open, and entered with a polite smile. "Coffee, gentlemen?" she said, her tone steady despite the tremor beneath. They barely looked up. She placed the tray at the head of the table. close enough to Coburn's papers for the transmitter to catch every word. Beneath the tray, a soft click signaled activation. For several minutes she moved quietly, refilling cups, pretending to adjust the sugar bowl, her ears catching fragments of conversation. "Legal has covered the transfer," one said. "The files are gone," another muttered. "If the auditors dig deeper, they'll find nothing." "He's finished." Coburn chuckled. "He won't surface again. By the time they realize what happened, Heliosite will be under new management." Aurora's pulse quickened. Every syllable was being recorded. Every smug confession sent to the van parked 2 blocks away. Inside that van, Mark sat with headphones pressed tight, eyes locked on the monitor. Beside him, Jonathan leaned forward, jaw tense. "Got them," Mark whispered. "Keep her steady." The feed crackled slightly, then cleared. They heard Coburn's voice again. "We'll announce the transition tomorrow. Once the paperwork's done, delete all backup drives. If he tries anything, we have our story. He vanished. Stress, breakdown, whatever sells." Jonathan closed his eyes, his hand forming a fist. "Playtime's over," he said quietly. Back in the conference room, Aurora finished her rounds, nodded politely, and turned to leave. But as she reached the door, Coburn's voice stopped her. "You wait." She froze. "What's your name?" he asked, squinting. Her throat tightened. "Emma," she said quickly, the name Mark had given her. Coburn studied her for a beat that felt eternal, then waved dismissively. "Tell the staff to keep the noise down next time." "Of course, sir," she murmured, slipping out before the air could collapse around her. She didn't breathe until she was back in the service hall. Pulling off her cap, she hurried toward the stairwell, her pulse racing. The tiny red light on the transmitter blinked twice before dying the recording complete. Downstairs, she exited through the employee corridor into the alley where the rain had just started again, gentle and cold. A black SUV waited. Mark opened the door. "You did it," he said, taking the tray. Jonathan looked at her, his expression unreadable at first, then softened. "You were perfect." Aurora let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sob. "I don't think I breathed for 10 minutes. "You did enough," he said. As they drove away, Mark played back the audio. Coburn's voice filled the car, calm and damning. Jonathan listened in silence, eyes on the window, rain streaking the glass like threads of silver. When the recording ended, he said, "Tomorrow, I walk into that room, and we end this." Aurora turned to him. "You're going back?" "I have to," he said. "If I don't face them, the truth means nothing." She wanted to argue but didn't. There was something in his voice steady, inevitable, that told her the decision was already made. That night, as the city lights blurred outside the window, Aurora sat beside Maya, brushing her hair while the child dozed off. Jonathan stood nearby, watching quietly. "She trusts you," he said softly. "She doesn't know any other way," Aurora replied. "Children don't question goodness. They just feel it." He nodded. "Maybe that's what we're trying to remember." She looked up at him. "You think it'll work?" "The truth always does," he said. Then after a pause, "Eventually." For a while, neither spoke. The apartment felt smaller now, but safer. The hum of the city below was almost comforting. Aurora found herself staring at the small transmitter on the table, the tiny object that now carried the weight of justice. Jonathan followed her gaze. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we bring light to where they built their shadows." She smiled faintly, exhaustion softening the lines of her face. "Then let's make sure the light is bright enough." Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed and silent. Inside, the three of them sat in the glow of a single lamp. The storm behind them for now, the reckoning ahead. The night held its breath. Morning light cut through the skyline like a blade, slicing the fog that had clung to Manhattan all night. The city below stirred to life, unaware that somewhere above it, a man was about to walk into the very room where they'd planned his death. Jonathan stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his cufflinks. His reflection looked calm, almost composed, but beneath that stillness was something steel-hard resolve sharpened by betrayal. On the table beside him lay the folder of evidence, neatly bound, and a small black recorder that held the voices of his enemies damning themselves. Aurora sat nearby, her fingers twisted in the hem of her sleeve, eyes fixed on him. "You don't have to go alone," she said quietly. "They'll be expecting you." He met her gaze in the mirror. "That's exactly why I have to go. Fear only works when you play by their rules." She rose, stepping closer. "What if they won't?" He interrupted softly, fastening his watch. "Not this time." He turned to face her, his voice calm but carrying a quiet current of fire. "You gave me a reason to fight again. Now I need to finish it." Mark entered, phone in hand. "Board's already gathering. They think they're holding an emergency leadership meeting. No one outside that room knows you're alive." Jonathan took the phone, scrolled through a message, and smiled faintly. "Perfect." He slipped it into his pocket, then looked to Aurora. "Stay here. If anything happens, we leave together," she cut in. "You're not walking back into that place to prove a point. You're doing it to end something. I'm not sitting this out." For a long moment, neither moved. Then he gave a small nod, half surrender, half respect. "Fine, but stay behind me." By 10 o'clock, the top floor of Heliocyte headquarters was a hive of false confidence. The board members gathered around the long glass table, their reflections stretching beneath them like ghosts. Coburn sat at the head, voice smooth and rehearsed. "We'll open by addressing Mr. Raines's absence," he said. "Publicly, it's stress leave. Privately, it's transition. The company must move forward." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "Our interim plan ensures investor confidence," another added. "With the press under control, we can pivot before the market reacts." Coburn adjusted his tie, the faintest smirk forming. "Gentlemen, as of this moment, Heliocyte's leadership stands united." The door opened. A hush fell. Jonathan Raines walked in. For a moment, the entire room froze, every breath suspended, every heartbeat caught mid-step. He looked almost unreal in the doorway. Dark suit, no tie, calm as if nothing had happened. The silence cracked first in Coburn's voice, roughened by shock. "Jonathan, good God, we thought you—" "I know what you thought," Jonathan said, walking forward. His tone was measured, each word landing like a hammer on glass. "But I'm not gone. Not yet." He set his briefcase on the table, the click of its latch echoing through the sterile air. "Please, don't get up on my account." No one moved. Some stared, others glanced nervously at each other, but no one dared speak. Jonathan opened the case and slid a thick folder across the polished surface toward Coburn. "This," he said evenly, "is the story you forgot to delete. Internal transfers, fake subsidiaries, shell accounts all signed and approved under your supervision." Coburn's hands twitched, but he forced a smile. "Jonathan, these accusations aren't accusations," Jonathan cut in. "They're proof." He pressed a button on a small remote. From the speakers hidden in the ceiling came the voices of the previous day's meeting, clear and unmistakable. He overreached. The moment he questioned the accounts, he signed his own resignation. By the time they realize what happened, Heliocyte will be under new management. The room turned to ice. Someone cursed under their breath. Another man stood halfway, then sat again. Coburn's face drained of color. Jonathan's voice dropped lower, almost gentle. "You wanted to erase me, to make me a ghost. But ghosts can haunt places, Mr. Coburn, especially when they bring the truth with them." He turned toward the others. "Every document in this folder has been verified, every audio file duplicated. Copies are already in the hands of federal investigators and 2 independent law firms. If anything happens to me, this evidence goes public instantly." His gaze swept the room. "You can choose denial, or you can choose integrity. Only one of those survives daylight." Coburn stood, his composure cracking. "You think you can blackmail the entire board?" Jonathan tilted his head slightly. "Blackmail? No, I'm just holding up a mirror." Coburn's voice rose, brittle. "You're finished, Raines. No one will believe a man who vanished in the middle of his own celebration." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Then it's fortunate I didn't vanish alone." He nodded toward the door. Aurora stepped in, dressed in a simple navy suit borrowed from Jonathan's assistant, her hair neatly tied back. She looked nothing like the waitress from that glittering night. She carried a small folder in her hands, walked to the table, and placed it beside Jonathan's. "That," he said, "is the original audit from 3 years ago, the one you had deleted. It took someone without clearance to find it someone you never saw coming. Coburn's eyes widened as recognition dawned. You, he hissed. The waitress. Aurora met his gaze without flinching. The one who heard what you planned, she said quietly, and wrote it down. The room erupted. Voices collided, protests, denials, desperate arguments. Jonathan didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply waited until the chaos folded in on itself, then spoke again. This company was built on vision. You turned it into a vault for greed. That ends today. He pressed another button on the remote, and the screen on the wall lit up with the company logo. Beneath it, a single word: transparency. Behind the glass walls, through the frosted partition, flashes of light began to appear. Reporters, cameras, security. The media had been alerted minutes before he entered. The exposure was already live. Coburn's composure shattered completely. You'll destroy everything, he spat. No, Jonathan said softly. I'm saving what's left. The doors opened again. Mark entered, flanked by 2 agents in dark suits. Federal subpoena, one of them announced. We'll need you to come with us, Mr. Coburn. The room fell silent except for the rustle of paper and the sound of surrender. Coburn turned to Jonathan one last time, eyes burning with disbelief. You think this makes you a hero? Jonathan met his gaze, calm and steady. No, he said. It just makes me honest. As the agents led Coburn out, the others sat in uneasy quiet, the sound of the world outside growing louder, press murmurs, camera clicks, footsteps converging. Jonathan closed his briefcase, exhaled slowly, and looked to Aurora. She stood motionless beside him, watching the scene unfold with a mix of relief and disbelief. You did it, she whispered. He shook his head slightly. We did. Minutes later, they stepped out of the boardroom together. The hallway was filled with reporters and flashes of light, but Jonathan didn't shield his face. Instead, he turned toward the cameras, his expression calm but resolute. No comment, he said simply, then placed a hand gently on Aurora's shoulder, guiding her through the noise. The chaos behind them grew, but in the middle of it, there was a strange kind of peace, a storm finally breaking. Outside, the winter sun had burned through the clouds, scattering shards of light across the street. Mark waited near the curb, engine running. As they climbed in, Aurora looked back through the tinted window. The tall glass building reflected the morning sky, its shine blinding, its surface spotless. Yet for the first time she could see the cracks beneath the reflection. What happens now? She asked quietly. Jonathan watched the building disappear behind them. Now, he said, we rebuild it the right way. They drove in silence for a while, the city sprawling around them, alive and indifferent. Aurora glanced at him, at the man who had walked back into his own execution and turned it into redemption. He was staring out the window, hands clasped loosely, but there was a calmness to him that hadn't been there before. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. They tried to bury me, he said. They forgot I was a seed. The words lingered in the air long after the car turned the corner, carrying them toward the next chapter none of them could yet name. 3 days later, New York woke beneath a sky so clear it looked almost new. The storm had passed, leaving the city rinsed and shining, every window pane catching the morning light. At Heliosite headquarters, cameras lined the entrance, reporters huddled behind barricades, their breath rising in white clouds. The company's logo glowed on the marble wall, but beneath it now hung a single word newly etched in silver: transparency. Inside, a press conference was about to begin. Jonathan stood backstage, adjusting his suit jacket, the same dark navy he'd worn the day of the confrontation. His eyes were calm, his voice even. Aurora stood nearby, hands clasped around a folded piece of paper. She could hear the murmur of journalists on the other side of the curtain, the buzz of cameras powering up. Maya sat in the front row with Mark, swinging her legs and smiling every time the lights blinked. For the first time in a long time, Aurora wasn't afraid of what waited beyond that stage. She was ready to face it. The host's voice echoed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Jonathan Rains, CEO of Heliosite Technologies. Applause followed, polite, cautious at first, then stronger as he stepped forward. Jonathan approached the podium, rested both hands on its edge, and looked over the sea of faces. "Thank you for being here," he began, his tone steady but carrying the quiet weight of everything that had led to this moment. "I stand before you not as the man you celebrated a week ago, but as someone who came dangerously close to losing everything because I chose to see what others looked away from." He paused, letting the words settle. "In recent months, I uncovered evidence of misconduct within one of our charitable foundations, funds meant to heal lives being stolen to fill pockets. Some of those responsible were people I trusted, people I called partners." A murmur rippled through the room. "Today, those individuals are under investigation. Heliosite has opened its records to federal authorities, and every cent will be traced, every wrong accounted for." He took a slow breath, his voice softening. "But this story isn't about corruption. It's about courage, about a moment of choice between silence and truth." He looked toward the side curtain and gave a small nod. "Because none of this would have been possible without one person." The lights shifted as Aurora stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair loose, her eyes wide but unflinching. The audience turned, murmurs rising. Jonathan extended a hand. "This is Aurora Lane," he said. "A woman who saw something wrong, risked everything, and saved not just my life, but the integrity of an entire company." The applause that followed wasn't polite this time, it was thunderous. Aurora stood beside him, unsure where to look, her heart pounding. "I'm not a hero," she said softly into the microphone. "I just couldn't stay silent." Jonathan smiled at her, then turned back to the crowd. "Sometimes, that's exactly what heroism is." From the front row, Maya clapped so hard her small hands echoed above the noise. Jonathan caught her eye and gestured for her to come up. Mark lifted the little girl onto the stage, and she ran straight into Aurora's arms. The room quieted again. Jonathan knelt beside Maya, lowering the mic. "If we want to raise children who are brave, honest, and kind," he said, looking at her, "we have to show them what that looks like." He turned to Aurora, then to the crowd. "Sometimes, it starts with one voice, one folded note, one act of quiet courage." The applause rose again, filling the hall until it felt like the walls themselves were breathing. Later, when the cameras had dimmed and the last reporter had left, the three of them stood together by the lobby windows, watching the afternoon sunlight spill across the city. "It's over," Aurora whispered, almost as if afraid to believe it. "It's beginning," Jonathan corrected gently. He handed her a small envelope embossed with the Heliosite seal. Inside was a contract, simple, elegant. "The board voted this morning," he said. "We're launching a new initiative, the Echo Project, a nonprofit to support and protect whistleblowers, people who do what you did. I want you to lead it with me." Aurora looked up, startled. "Me? You've already proven you understand what it stands for," he said. "Empathy, integrity, voice." She hesitated, emotion tightening her throat. "I'm not a leader." "You already are," he said quietly. "You just need a title that fits." Weeks passed, and the noise faded into rhythm again. Heliosite began rebuilding under new leadership, its culture shifting from silence to openness. The headlines that once screamed scandal now spoke of reform and redemption. Jonathan no longer hid behind glass offices. He walked the halls, greeted employees by name, listened when they spoke. Aurora's office, modest but bright, became a place where anyone could come, from interns to janitors, to talk about what they'd seen or feared. Maya's drawings decorated one corner, a reminder that innocence could live even in places rebuilt from broken trust. Mark teased that the two of them had turned a tech empire into a human one. Jonathan only smiled. "That's the point," he'd say. Spring returned to the city with warmth that felt like forgiveness. One Sunday afternoon, they sat together in Central Park, Jonathan, Aurora, and Maya on a bench beneath a blooming maple tree. Maya licked strawberry ice cream, her legs swinging in rhythm with the breeze. Aurora leaned back, eyes half closed, letting the sunlight wash over her. Jonathan watched them quietly, a rare peace softening his face. "It's strange," he said after a while. "For years I thought success was about being heard, having the loudest voice in the room. But the thing that saved me was silence. Yours." Aurora smiled faintly. "Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only way to listen." He nodded. And the only way to change. Maya looked up at them, a drip of ice cream on her chin. Do you think everyone will be brave someday? She asked. Jonathan turned to her, then to Aurora, the corners of his mouth lifting. Maybe not everyone, he said, but one brave voice can help others find theirs. Aurora reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. For a long moment, they just sat there, 3 lives connected by the thin, invisible thread of truth. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying the sound of laughter from somewhere nearby. It was a good sound, human, alive, free. As the sun began to set, painting the city in gold, Jonathan unfolded a small piece of paper from his pocket, the original note Aurora had written that night. The ink had faded, the edges worn, but the words were still clear. Do not drink. Leave now. They know you found out. He looked at it, then at her. This, he said softly, wasn't just a warning. It was a reminder that truth always finds a voice, even when it whispers. She smiled, eyes glistening. Then keep it, she said, so you don't forget. He nodded. I won't. They sat there until the park lights flickered on, the city breathing around them, alive with quiet hope. The story that had begun with fear now ended with peace, and somewhere between those two places, they had found not only survival but meaning. And as the camera of the world slowly faded out, Jonathan's voice lingered, a final echo carried on the wind. They told me to stay silent, but a girl with nothing but a folded note reminded me that truth deserves a voice. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage doesn't always roar but sometimes whispers through a trembling hand, then share this story and keep its echo alive. Tap the like button, subscribe, and stay with us for more tales that remind the world what kindness and integrity still mean. Because somewhere, someone's waiting for a reason to believe again.